love can feel like a home, even when you're the only one living in it. For 4 years, Eli believed he had found that home. The house was always warm, always quiet in that expensive, controlled way that made everything feel stable. He had everything most people would envy: tailored clothes that fit perfectly, a black card he never had to think twice about using, gifts that arrived without him asking, each one more expensive than the last. Vincent never limited him. If anything, Vincent made sure Eli lacked nothing, except the one thing Eli never stopped waiting for. In the beginning, Eli told himself that was enough. He had grown up with nothing, with no one who stayed long enough to call family, no place that ever felt permanent. So when Vincent offered him a life where he didn't have to worry, where he could simply exist without struggling, Eli accepted it completely. He even gave up the one thing that used to belong only to him: his career. Vincent had never forced him outright, but the message had always been clear. "You don't need to work," Vincent had said once, his tone calm, final. "Just stay." And Eli had stayed. He convinced himself it was love, that choosing Vincent over everything else meant something deeper, something stronger. That one day, Vincent would see it too. The nights they spent under the same roof, the quiet mornings, the small routines. Eli held on to those like proof that what they had was real. But the world outside that house never let him forget what he really was. At gatherings, Eli stood beside Vincent, dressed perfectly, smiling softly, playing the role he had learned so well. But the looks never changed. The whispers never stopped. "That's him," someone would murmur, just loud enough. "He doesn't look like the original." Another voice, sharper, less careful. "Of course he doesn't. He's just a replacement." Eli heard everything. He always did. And sometimes, they didn't even bother lowering their voices. "Must be nice," one of Vincent's friends said once, swirling a drink in his hand, eyes scanning Eli like he was something bought, not chosen. "No job, unlimited spending. I should try that." Laughter followed. Light, effortless, cruel in a way that didn't need to be loud. Eli's fingers tightened slightly around his glass, but his smile didn't falter. It never did, because Vincent was right there. Vincent heard it too. Eli knew he did. There was no way he didn't. But Vincent never said anything, never corrected them, never told them to stop. He would simply stand there, calm, detached, as if none of it mattered, as if Eli didn't matter enough to defend. And still, Eli stayed, because every now and then, Vincent would do something small, rest a hand briefly on Eli's shoulder, glance at him just a second longer than necessary, sit beside him in silence that didn't feel completely empty. And Eli would hold on to those moments like they meant more than everything else combined. Because to Eli, they did. He told himself Vincent just didn't know how to show love. That his coldness was just part of who he was, not a reflection of how he felt. That if Eli stayed long enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, Vincent would eventually choose him. So Eli learned to be what Vincent needed. To be there when Vincent returned late, to sit quietly when Vincent didn't want conversation, to respond when Vincent reached for him without question. It wasn't something Eli thought too deeply about anymore. It was just part of the life he had accepted. Because being needed, even like that, still felt better than being alone. But somewhere along the way, something began to change. It was subtle at first. Vincent started coming home later than usual. Then some nights, he didn't come home at all. The messages became shorter. The silence between them stretched longer. Eli noticed everything. He always had. But he told himself not to overthink it. Vincent was busy. Vincent had responsibilities. Vincent had a life outside of him. That was normal. That was reasonable. So Eli adjusted. He started waiting up later, preparing dinners that often went untouched, sitting at the table long after the food had gone cold. The house felt bigger on those nights, quieter in a way that pressed in on him. Still, he waited, because that's what he had always done. And then there was that night. The rain had been falling for hours, tapping softly against the windows as Eli sat alone in the dim light, the clock ticking steadily on the wall. It was past midnight when he finally heard the door open. Relief came first, automatic, immediate. Eli stood quickly, moving toward the hallway just as Vincent stepped inside. Vincent looked different. His movements were slower, less controlled, his usual sharp presence softened by something unfamiliar. The faint scent of alcohol lingered in the air. Eli paused for just a second, concern replacing relief as he stepped closer. "Vincent." His voice was gentle, careful. Vincent didn't answer right away. His gaze seemed unfocused at first, like he was looking through Eli rather than at him. Then, suddenly, Vincent reached out, pulling Eli closer with a force that caught him off guard. Eli's breath hitched slightly, his hands instinctively coming up to steady himself against Vincent's chest. For a moment, everything felt the same again, familiar, close, almost like those early days when Eli believed this meant something more. Vincent's arms tightened around him, holding him in place. And then Vincent spoke. Softly, not to Eli. I missed you. The words were slurred slightly, but clear enough. Eli's heart skipped, something fragile lighting up inside him, until the next words followed. A name, not his. The world seemed to tilt for just a second. Eli went still in Vincent's arms, the warmth of the moment collapsing into something cold and hollow. Vincent didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and it didn't matter. Eli's fingers slowly loosened against Vincent's shirt, the reality settling in piece by piece. It wasn't him. It had never been him. And yet, Eli didn't pull away. He couldn't. Because even now, even with everything unraveling, a part of him still wanted to believe that if he stayed just a little longer, something might change. But that night planted something different in Eli's heart. Not just doubt, not just pain, but a quiet, growing understanding. And he didn't realize it yet. But that understanding would soon become the reason he finally chose to leave. The moment you stop waiting is the moment everything becomes clear. Eli didn't sleep that night. He stayed exactly where Vincent had left him, standing in the quiet darkness of the hallway long after the front door had closed behind Vincent's unsteady steps, long after the faint scent of alcohol had faded into nothing. The house returned to its usual silence, but something inside Eli had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, almost invisible, like a thread finally snapping after being pulled too tight for too long. Eli moved slowly, his body heavy but his mind strangely awake, replaying the moment over and over again. Not the way Vincent had held him, not the warmth of it, but the name. That single name that had slipped so easily from Vincent's lips, as if it had always belonged there, as if Eli had never been meant to take its place. He walked back into the dining room, where the untouched dinner still sat on the table, the food now cold, forgotten. The candles had burned down low, their soft light flickering weakly as if mirroring the last fragile pieces of hope Eli had been holding on to. For a long moment, Eli just stood there, looking at the scene he had created hours earlier. Carefully prepared dishes, everything arranged the way Vincent liked, every detail thought through with quiet care. It looked like something meant for two people, but it had always been just for one. Eli reached out and gently turned off the lights, one by one, until the room fell into darkness. The gesture felt symbolic in a way he didn't fully process, like he was closing something he had spent years trying to keep open. He didn't cry. That was the strange part. There were no tears, no breakdown, no dramatic collapse. Just a steady, growing understanding that settled deeper with every passing second. For 4 years, Eli had waited. Waited for Vincent to notice him. Waited for Vincent to choose him. Waited for something to change. And now he finally understood. Nothing was ever going to change. Because Vincent had never been waiting. Vincent had already chosen, just not him. Eli exhaled slowly, his hand once again drifting to his stomach. This time lingering there longer, firmer, as if grounding himself in something real. Something that was his. We can't stay here, he whispered softly, the words carrying a quiet certainty that hadn't been there before. It wasn't fear that pushed him forward now. It wasn't even pain. It was clarity. A clarity that made everything else fall into place. Eli turned and walked back toward his room, his steps more deliberate than they had ever been. The hallway felt different this time. Not like something he was leaving, but like something he had already outgrown. Inside his room, the air felt still, untouched, as if it had been waiting for him to return with this decision already made. Eli moved straight to the closet, pulling out a small suitcase and setting it on the bed. The sound of the zipper was quiet but final as he opened it, the action marking the beginning of something he had never thought he would actually do. He didn't take much, just the things that belonged to him, the things that had nothing to do with Vincent. Each item was placed carefully, thoughtfully, as if Eli was not just packing belongings, but separating himself piece by piece from a life that had never fully accepted him. His movements were steady, controlled. No hesitation, no second-guessing. Because for the first time in 4 years, Eli wasn't waiting for Vincent to decide his future. He was deciding it himself. When he finished, Eli stood still for a moment, his gaze drifting around the room one last time. There were no strong memories here. No moments that felt irreplaceable. Just fragments of something that had once felt like it could become more. Slowly, Eli reached for the nightstand and pulled open the drawer, taking out a small envelope and a sheet of paper. He hesitated briefly, the pen hovering just above the surface, before finally writing. The words came easily, too easily, as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. No accusations, no anger, just the truth, simple, quiet, undeniable. When he finished, Eli folded the paper neatly and placed it inside the envelope, setting it gently on the nightstand where Vincent would see it. Not because he expected Vincent to understand, but because this was the last thing Eli would leave behind. A final acknowledgement that he had been there at all. Eli picked up his suitcase, his grip firm, his posture steady. For a brief moment, he paused, his eyes falling on the edge of the bed, on the space where he had spent countless nights hoping for something that never came. And then, without another thought, he turned away. The house was silent as he walked through it, the same silence that had once comforted him now feeling empty, distant. He passed through each space without slowing down, without looking back, because there was nothing left for him there. By the time Eli reached the front door, the rain had already started, soft at first, then gradually stronger, tapping against the glass like a quiet warning or maybe a quiet release. Eli opened the door, the cool air hitting his skin instantly, carrying with it a sense of something unknown, something uncertain, but also something free. He stepped outside without hesitation. The rain soaked into his clothes within seconds, but Eli didn't stop. He didn't flinch. He just kept moving, each step taking him further away from the life he had spent 4 years trying to belong to. Behind him, the door closed softly. And this time, Eli didn't feel like something was ending. He felt like something had finally begun. You don't notice what someone means to you until the silence they leave behind becomes louder than anything else. Vincent didn't return home until well past midnight the next day. The house was dark when he stepped inside, quiet in the same controlled way it always was, but something about it felt off. He couldn't name it at first. He didn't try to. He loosened his tie, shrugging off his coat as he walked through the hallway with his usual calm, detached composure, as if nothing in his world had changed. Because in his mind, nothing had. Not yet. His steps slowed slightly as he passed Eli's room, the door half open, the light off. A faint crease appeared between his brows, more out of habit than concern. Eli was usually there, waiting. Whether Vincent came home early or late, whether he acknowledged it or not, Eli was always there. Vincent pushed the door open without knocking. The room was neat. Too neat. The air felt still, untouched in a way that immediately drew his attention. His gaze swept across the space, sharp, observant, and then stopped. The closet door was slightly open. Vincent moved toward it, pulling it wider. Empty. Not completely, but enough. Enough to tell him something had changed. His jaw tightened subtly. He turned, his eyes scanning the room again, slower this time, more deliberate. That was when he saw it. The envelope on the nightstand. Vincent picked it up, his expression unreadable as he opened it and unfolded the paper inside. His eyes moved across the words quickly, then again, slower. The silence in the room thickened. There were no dramatic lines, no accusations, no anger, just a quiet goodbye. Vincent stared at the paper for a long moment before letting out a low, humorless breath. So that's it, he muttered under his breath, the words laced with something sharp, something cold. Not regret. Not yet. His fingers tightened slightly around the paper, his expression hardening as something else rose to the surface. Pride. Offense. Left without a word, Vincent scoffed softly, though the letter was still in his hand. After everything, his mind didn't go to what Eli had endured. It didn't go to the nights Eli had waited, or the silence he had tolerated, or the things Vincent had chosen not to see. It went to himself, to the fact that Eli had left first, that Eli had made the decision without him, that Eli had walked away. Vincent placed the paper back down on the nightstand with controlled precision, as if the act itself didn't matter, as if Eli didn't matter. If he wants to leave, then he can stay gone. The words came easily, too easily, and Vincent believed them, or at least he chose to, because anything else would require him to look deeper than he was willing to. The next few days passed in a blur of noise and distraction. Vincent didn't stay home. There was no reason to. The house felt different now, though he refused to acknowledge why. So instead, He filled his time elsewhere, with meetings that ran longer than necessary, with nights that stretched later than usual, with places that were louder, brighter, easier to disappear into. His friends noticed the shift immediately. So he finally left, one of them said one night, raising a glass with a grin that didn't quite hide the curiosity underneath. Vincent didn't react. He simply took a sip of his drink, his expression unchanged. About time, another added with a light laugh. That whole thing was getting old. Yeah, someone else chimed in. Now you can focus on what actually matters. A pause. Then, almost casually, speaking of, I heard he's coming back. Vincent's hand stilled slightly around his glass. Who? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Your first love, the man said, smirking faintly. He's back in the city. Thought you'd want to know. The table buzzed with quiet interest, subtle glances exchanged as if waiting for a reaction. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his expression calm, unreadable. I see, he said simply. No excitement. No visible emotion. Just control. Because that was what Vincent did best. The conversation moved on quickly, laughter rising again, drinks refilled, the night continuing as if nothing had shifted. And Vincent allowed himself to be pulled into it. It was easier that way. Easier than thinking about the empty room in his house. Easier than noticing the absence of something he had never thought twice about before. But eventually, the noise faded. The nights ended. And Vincent returned home. Alone. The silence greeted him again, but this time, it lingered longer. He walked through the house slowly, his steps echoing faintly in the stillness. No soft footsteps meeting him in the hallway. No quiet voice asking if he had eaten. No light left on in the dining room. Vincent paused in the doorway, his gaze falling on the empty table. No dinner. No waiting. Nothing. A faint irritation flickered in his chest. TCH, he muttered under his breath, loosening his tie again as if the gesture could shake off the feeling. Annoying. But the word felt off. Incomplete. Because what he was feeling wasn't annoyance. It was absence. And absence had weight. Vincent moved through the house, each room reinforcing the same quiet realization. The couch where Eli used to sit. The kitchen where meals had once been prepared without him asking. The faint traces of a presence that had quietly shaped his daily life in ways he had never acknowledged. Even his phone felt different. No messages. No small updates. No quiet reminders that someone was thinking about him, waiting for him, adjusting their world around his. Vincent stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary before setting it down again. His expression didn't change, but something in his chest tightened slightly. Just for a second. Then it was gone. He chose to leave, Vincent said aloud, his voice steady, firm. That's his decision. The words sounded convincing. Logical. Final. But they didn't fill the silence. They didn't replace what was missing. And still, Vincent didn't reach out. He didn't call. He didn't ask. Because something deeper than everything else held him back. Pride. On the other side of the city, Eli sat by a window, watching the early morning light spill softly across the room. The space was smaller. Simpler. But it felt lighter. For the first time in years, Eli didn't feel like he had to hold himself together for someone else. He didn't have to wait. Didn't have to guess. Didn't have to prove anything. He simply existed. And that alone felt like freedom. His phone rested in his hand, the contact already open. It had taken him a while to press call. Not because he was unsure, but because it meant stepping into something new. Finally, Eli tapped the screen. The line rang only once before it connected. Eli. The voice on the other end was warm, surprised. Familiar in a way that didn't hurt. Eli smiled faintly, a real smile this time, soft and unguarded. Hey, it's been a while. There was a pause, then a quiet exhale. Yeah, the man said. It has. This Alpha was different. Calm in a different way. Not cold. Not distant. Just steady. Reliable. I need help, Eli said simply. No hesitation. No shame. Just honesty. The response came without question. Then you have it. And for the first time in a long time, Eli believed it. Days later, Eli stood in a new office, sunlight streaming through wide windows, the space filled with quiet energy and purpose. It wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't suffocating. It felt right. The Alpha who had helped him stood nearby, watching him with a thoughtful expression. Your portfolio speaks for itself, he said calmly. You should have never stopped. Eli lowered his gaze slightly, a small, almost self-conscious smile appearing. I thought I made the right choice back then. You made a choice, the man corrected gently. Now you're making another one. Eli nodded. his hand resting lightly against his stomach for a brief moment. This time, the gesture felt different. Not hidden, not uncertain, just real. The Alpha noticed the movement, his expression softening slightly, not with judgment, but with quiet understanding. "We'll make sure you're taken care of," he said simply. "No pressure, no conditions, just support." And Eli realized something then. For the first time, being cared for didn't feel like something he had to earn. It just was. Sometimes, the truth doesn't arrive gently, it crashes in, tearing apart everything you chose not to see. 3 months passed. Long enough for the house Vincent lived in to return to its usual order. Long enough for the silence to become something he stopped questioning. And long enough for people around him to believe that Eli had simply become what they always said he was: temporary. The news came quietly, almost casually, in the middle of another gathering. "He's back," someone said, leaning back in his chair with a knowing smile. "Thought you'd want to know." Vincent didn't need to ask who. He already knew. Adrian Cole. The name carried a weight that hadn't faded, not even after all this time. The person everyone had compared Eli to. The one they said Eli could never replace. When Adrian walked into the room later that night, everything shifted. He looked exactly the same. Refined, composed, effortlessly elegant in a way that drew attention without trying. His smile was soft, his voice smooth, his presence calculated in a way that felt almost practiced. He greeted Vincent like nothing had changed, like time had simply paused and resumed. "It's been a while," Adrian said, his eyes lingering just a second too long. Vincent gave a small nod. "It has." Around them, the atmosphere grew lighter, more animated. The group welcomed Adrian easily, naturally, as if he had always belonged there. And then, as if on cue, the conversation turned. "You know," one of them said with a chuckle, glancing toward Vincent, "things have been quieter lately." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "Oh," another voice joined in, amused. "Your little substitute finally left." A few laughs followed. Vincent didn't react at first. He simply took a sip of his drink, his expression unreadable. But the conversation didn't stop. It never did. "Honestly, I don't know how he lasted that long," someone else added. "Remember that night at the club? He just stood there while The man laughed, shaking his head. "Didn't even fight back." "Yeah," another chimed in. "Or when we told him straight to his face, he was just filling in for you." A smirk. "He still stayed." Adrian's smile didn't falter, but his eyes flickered briefly with something sharper, more interested. "He must have been very attached," he said lightly. Vincent's grip on his glass tightened almost imperceptibly. The room continued, voices overlapping, each story more casual than the last. Attached? He was desperate. I swear, you could say anything to him, and he'd just smile. It was kind of pathetic, actually. The word hung in the air. Pathetic. And something in Vincent snapped. The glass hit the table harder than intended, the sharp sound cutting through the laughter instantly. Silence followed. Before anyone could react, Vincent stood, his movements controlled but fast, his gaze locked onto the man who had just spoken. "Say that again." Vincent's voice was low, dangerously calm. The man blinked, caught off guard. "What?" That was all it took. Vincent's hand moved before anyone could stop him, grabbing the front of the man's shirt, the sudden force sending the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I said, say it again." The room froze. No one expected this. Not over Eli. Not over someone they had all agreed didn't matter. The man stammered, trying to pull back, but Vincent's grip didn't loosen. For a split second, something raw flickered in Vincent's eyes. Anger, yes, but something else beneath it. Something that hadn't been there before. Then Vincent released him just as abruptly, stepping back as if the contact itself had been a mistake. The silence lingered. Vincent didn't look at anyone. He didn't say anything else. He just turned and walked out. The night air was cold when Vincent stepped outside, the noise of the city dull compared to the noise in his head. The words replayed. The laughter. The stories. Things he had heard before. Things he had ignored. Things he had chosen not to see. And now they sounded different. He got into his car without thinking, driving without a destination, his mind pulling apart memories he had once dismissed. Eli standing quietly at those gatherings. Eli smiling, even when no one else was. Eli waiting. Always waiting. Vincent exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair as frustration and something heavier twisted in his chest. He didn't like this feeling. He didn't understand it. But he couldn't ignore it anymore. Hours later, Vincent sat alone in his apartment, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The room felt too quiet, too still. His phone sat on the table in front of him. He stared at it for a long time before finally picking it up. There was only one contact he knew. The only person Eli had ever mentioned more than once. Vincent pressed call. The line rang. Once. Twice. Then, what do you want? The voice on the other end was sharp, immediately hostile. Vincent's jaw tightened. I need to know where Eli is. A pause. Then a bitter laugh. Now you care? Vincent's grip on the phone tightened. Just tell me. No, the man snapped. You don't get to do that. You don't get to ignore him for years and then suddenly decide he matters. Vincent's expression darkened. Watch your tone. Or what? The voice shot back. You'll do what you always did? Nothing. The silence stretched. Then, quieter, colder. Do you even know who he is? Vincent didn't answer. He didn't need to. The man scoffed. Of course you don't. You never cared enough to ask. Each word landed heavier than the last. Eli was at the top of his class. Scholarships. Offers from companies you've probably worked with. He had a future before you. Vincent's fingers tightened. He gave all of that up. For you. Because he thought you were the only person who wouldn't leave him. Vincent's chest tightened slightly. His family already did that. Walked away like he didn't matter. And you. A sharp breath. You were supposed to be different. The call ended before Vincent could respond. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vincent didn't move for a long time. Then, slowly, he poured the drink and downed it in one motion. And then another. The night stretched on, one glass turning into several, the weight of everything pressing down harder with each passing hour. The next morning, the decision came without hesitation. Find him, Vincent said coldly, handing over the file. I don't care how. It didn't take long. It never did. The address was simple. Ordinary. Nothing like the life Eli used to live. Vincent stood outside the building, his gaze fixed on the entrance, something unfamiliar settling in his chest. And then the door opened. A man stepped out first. Tall, composed, dressed in a way that spoke of quiet authority. Vincent's eyes narrowed. Moments later, Eli appeared behind him, and everything else faded. Eli looked different. Softer, but stronger in a way Vincent hadn't seen before. And then Vincent saw it. The curve beneath Eli's coat. Subtle, but undeniable. His breath stilled. His mind raced. A sharp, immediate thought cut through everything else. Not possible. Unless, something dark flickered in Vincent's eyes. By the time the other alpha left, Vincent was already moving. Eli. The name came out sharper than intended. Eli turned, his expression calm, almost distant. Not the way Vincent remembered. Not the way Eli used to look at him. You left, Vincent said, the accusation clear in his tone. Eli didn't respond. That silence only fueled something sharper inside Vincent. His gaze dropped briefly, again to the curve of Eli's stomach, then back up, colder now. Whose is it? The question came out before he could stop it. Eli's expression didn't change. Does it matter? Vincent's jaw tightened. It does if it's not mine. Another pause. Eli looked at him, steady, unshaken. We're not together anymore. The words landed clean. Final. And I'm not anyone's replacement. Vincent's chest tightened, something defensive rising instantly. You think that's what this is? I know what it was, Eli replied quietly. Vincent stepped closer, frustration building. Adrian and I, there's nothing there. It's just history. But Eli didn't react. Didn't soften. Didn't deny anything Vincent had implied. And that, more than anything, pushed Vincent over the edge. Fine, Vincent muttered coldly, stepping back. If that's how you want it. He turned without another word. But this time, the silence followed him. The cruelest part of love is realizing you were the only one who thought it was real. Eli sat alone by the window, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass, but none of it reaching him. The room was quiet, not the heavy, suffocating silence of before, but something softer, emptier in a different way. And yet, his chest still ached. Not because he regretted leaving, but because of everything he had given and how little it had meant. For years. For years of loving someone who had never truly seen him. For years of convincing himself that coldness was just Vincent's way of loving. That silence meant comfort. That indifference meant trust. Eli let out a slow breath, his fingers resting lightly over his stomach, his touch instinctive now, protective in a way that no longer felt uncertain. I was stupid, he murmured quietly, not with self-hatred, but with a quiet, painful clarity. Because he had believed, truly believed that if he stayed long enough, Vincent would choose him. That if he gave up enough, Vincent would eventually give something back. And when he left, a part of him had still hoped. That Vincent would notice. That Vincent would come after him. That Vincent would finally realize what he had lost. But 3 months had passed. 3 months of silence. And when Vincent finally appeared, it wasn't regret that came first. It was suspicion, jealousy, accusation. Eli closed his eyes briefly, his grip tightening slightly over his stomach. Even now, he whispered softly, "You still don't trust me." That was what hurt the most. Not the neglect, not the loneliness, but the fact that even after everything, Vincent had still thought the worst of him. Eli exhaled slowly, his gaze lifting again, toward the city beyond. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled him, because now, he had something more important, something that was his. On the other side of the city, Vincent stood in front of the window in his office, his reflection staring back at him, sharper, colder than usual, but not as steady. Not anymore. The events from earlier replayed in his mind, every word Eli had said cutting deeper the more he thought about it. "We're not together anymore. I'm not anyone's replacement. Does it matter?" Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. Something about it didn't sit right. Not the way Eli spoke. Not the way he looked. And not the timing. Vincent turned abruptly, grabbing his phone. "I want everything," he said coldly when the call connected. From the moment he left. The investigation didn't take long. It never did. And when the results came in, Vincent went completely still. They met after he left. The report stated clearly. No prior contact. Vincent stared at the file, his fingers tightening slowly. 3 months. The timeline didn't match. It couldn't. His gaze dropped, his mind flashing back to the curve of Eli's stomach, to the quiet way Eli had held it, to the instinctive protection in that single movement. Something sharp cut through his chest. Not doubt. Certainty. "It's mine," Vincent murmured under his breath, the realization settling in with a weight he couldn't ignore. His child. Eli had been carrying his child alone. Vincent closed his eyes briefly, something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. Not just regret, but something deeper. Something heavier. "I need to fix this," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. And for the first time, Vincent wasn't thinking about pride. He was thinking about Eli. The next night, the ballroom was filled with light, music, and quiet displays of wealth that defined the upper world they lived in. Vincent stood among it all, composed as always, his presence commanding without effort. Adrian lingered close, his hand occasionally brushing Vincent's arm, his smile soft, carefully calculated. "You've been distant," Adrian said lightly, tilting his head. "Something on your mind?" Vincent didn't respond immediately, because his attention had already shifted. Toward the entrance. Toward the moment everything else in the room seemed to fade. Eli walked in. Not alone. Beside him was a man Vincent now knew well. Cassian Ardent. Refined. Powerful. One of the few alphas who stood on equal ground with him. But that wasn't what caught Vincent's attention. It was the way Eli looked. Calm. Composed. Different. Stronger. And the way Cassian stood beside him. Not possessive, not controlling, but present. Protective. Vincent's gaze darkened slightly. Something sharp stirred in his chest. Jealousy. Raw. Immediate. Without thinking, Vincent's hand lifted, resting lightly against Adrian's waist as he leaned closer, his voice low, almost intimate. "Stay with me." Adrian's smile deepened instantly, pleased, leaning in just enough to make the gesture noticeable. Across the room, Eli saw it. For just a second, something flickered in his eyes. Pain. Quick. Subtle. Gone just as fast. His expression remained calm, unmoved, and somehow, that hurt Vincent more than anything else. The group noticed Eli next. Of course they did. "Well, look who's back," one of them said with a smirk. "Didn't take long to find a replacement, huh?" Another laughed. "Guess being a substitute is a habit." The words hung in the air. But this time, something changed. Cassian stepped forward, his voice calm, controlled, but firm. "Careful," he said. "You're speaking to a member of my executive board." Silence. Immediate. Heavy. The group stiffened, expressions shifting almost instantly. "Wait, what?" "That's not." Cassian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Eli Vale is one of the most capable people in my company," he continued smoothly. "You might want to reconsider how you speak." The shift was immediate. Awkward smiles. Forced laughter. "We didn't realize." "Yeah, we were just joking. No offense, Eli." Eli didn't respond. He didn't need to. But Adrian noticed. And he didn't like it. His expression softened, his tone sweet as he leaned closer to Vincent, his hand sliding along Vincent's arm in a gesture that looked innocent, but wasn't. People can be so harsh, Adrian said gently, glancing toward Eli with a faint, knowing smile. You've always been too kind, Vincent. The implication was clear, the contrast deliberate. Vincent's jaw tightened, and then something snapped. His hand pulled away from Adrian instantly, the movement sharper than intended. That's enough, Vincent said coldly. Before Adrian could react, Vincent was already moving, crossing the distance, stopping directly in front of Eli. We need to talk. Eli didn't resist when Vincent took his wrist, pulling him away from the crowd, away from the noise, into a quiet corner where the tension between them felt even heavier. Vincent let go. Slowly, his gaze fixed on Eli, searching, intense. About earlier, he started, his voice lower now. I was wrong. Eli didn't respond. Vincent took a breath, something unfamiliar in his tone now. Not command, not control. Something closer to honesty. The child, he continued, his eyes dropping briefly, then lifting again. It's mine. Eli's expression didn't change. Vincent stepped closer. I know it is. A pause. Then, come back with me. The words came out steady, but there was something beneath them now. Urgency. We can fix this. We can. No, the word cut through him cleanly. Vincent froze. Eli looked at him, calm, unwavering. There's nothing to fix. Vincent's chest tightened. Eli, you don't love me, Eli said quietly. Not accusing, not emotional, just certain. You just don't like losing something that used to be yours. The words hit harder than anything else that night. That's not true. It is, Eli interrupted gently. Because when it mattered, you chose to stay silent. His gaze didn't waver. When they humiliated me, you said nothing. When they treated me like I didn't belong, you agreed by doing nothing. Vincent couldn't speak. And now you're here. Because I left. Eli's hand rested briefly against his stomach. Not because you finally see me. The silence between them stretched. Final. I'm not going back, Eli said softly. I don't need you to raise this child. Vincent's control broke. His hand reached out, pulling Eli into an embrace, tight, desperate. Eli, please. His voice dropped, raw in a way it had never been before. I'll change. I swear. But Eli didn't respond. Didn't return it. Didn't move. And that silence said everything. A moment later, another presence approached. That's enough. Cashin's voice was calm, but final. Vincent's grip loosened slowly. And this time, Eli stepped away first. Cashin placed a hand lightly at Eli's back, guiding him away, his posture steady, protective without force. Vincent didn't follow. He couldn't. He stood there, watching as Eli walked away, not alone. And for the first time, Vincent realized there was nothing he could do to stop it. Some people love too late, and spend the rest of their lives trying to prove it wasn't too late at all. Vincent had never chased anyone before. He didn't need to. People came to him, stayed for as long as he allowed, and left when they no longer served a purpose. That was how his world worked. Controlled, predictable, detached. But Eli was the first person who walked away and didn't look back. And Vincent realized very quickly he didn't know how to handle that. The first message he sent was simple. Just a few words. Direct. Controlled. Did you get home safely? He stared at the screen longer than he wanted to admit. Waiting. Minutes passed. Then an hour. No reply. Vincent frowned slightly, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Irritation. Not because Eli didn't respond, but because Vincent recognized this feeling. This quiet waiting. This subtle anticipation. It was something Eli used to do. Every day, Vincent sent another message the next morning. Eat properly. Still no reply. By the third message, the realization settled in. Eli wasn't ignoring him out of spite. He simply didn't feel the need to respond anymore. And that hit harder than rejection ever could. But Vincent didn't stop. If anything, it made him more certain. Flowers arrived at Eli's office 2 days later. Clean. Elegant. Nothing excessive. Just enough to show intention. Eli looked at them briefly when they were delivered, his expression unreadable, before calmly asking the receptionist to send them back. Vincent stared at the returned bouquet for a long moment, his fingers tightening slightly around the stems. He didn't get angry. He just ordered another one the next day. And the day after that, when messages didn't work, Vincent adjusted. He showed up. The first time he stood outside Eli's office building, he told himself it was just coincidence. That he had business nearby. That he happened to notice Eli walking out. But when Eli saw him, his expression didn't change. Not surprise, not warmth, just acknowledgement. "I'll take you home," Vincent said, his tone steady, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Eli shook his head lightly. "I'm not alone." Vincent's gaze shifted slightly, and that was when he saw him. Cassian Ardent, standing just a few steps away, calm, composed, his presence quiet but undeniable. Vincent's jaw tightened. But this time, he didn't react the way he used to. He didn't claim, didn't assert, didn't get angry. Instead, he stepped forward slightly. "Then I'll come with you." The air shifted. Cassian's eyes flickered briefly with interest, but he didn't refuse. And Eli didn't stop him. The ride was quiet, controlled. Vincent sat beside Eli, aware of every small movement, every breath, every inch of distance between them. It felt closer than it had in months, and yet further than ever before. That became his new routine. Messages, flowers, waiting outside, finding reasons to be there, to be near, to exist in Eli's space, even if Eli didn't invite him in. Some nights, Vincent went further. He stood outside Eli's apartment building, hands in his coat pockets, the cold air settling into his skin as hours passed. Waiting, watching the lights in Eli's apartment, knowing Eli was inside, but choosing not to knock, because he knew he wouldn't be welcomed. So he waited instead, until morning, until the city woke up around him, until Eli stepped outside and saw him still there. The first time it happened, Eli paused, just for a second. Something flickered in his eyes, not forgiveness, not acceptance, but something softer than before. "You don't need to do this," Eli said quietly. Vincent met his gaze. "I know." And still he stayed. Over time, Vincent began to notice things he had never paid attention to before. The way Eli walked more carefully now. The way his hand would rest protectively against his stomach without thinking. The subtle signs of exhaustion. And every time, Cassian was there, opening doors, adjusting Eli's pace, making sure he was comfortable in ways Vincent had never even considered before. Vincent saw everything. And for the first time, he didn't let jealousy turn into anger. He let it become something else. Determination. So instead of pushing Cassian away, Vincent inserted himself. Quietly, gradually, he learned Eli's schedule, showed up at the same times, walked beside them instead of against them. And slowly, the distance between them stopped growing. It didn't close, but it stopped widening. Weeks passed, then months. Vincent moved closer. Literally. An apartment just a few blocks away from Eli's. Close enough to be there when needed. Close enough to not miss anything. When Eli found out, he didn't react immediately. He just looked at Vincent, calm, unreadable. "You're doing too much," Eli said quietly. Vincent didn't deny it. "I'm the father." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Eli's hand rested briefly against his stomach again. A small, instinctive gesture. "This child," Vincent continued, his voice lower now, "needs me." A pause. "Not you," Eli corrected gently. "The pheromones." Vincent nodded once. "Then I'll provide that." The silence stretched between them before. Eli finally spoke again. "You can stay for that." Vincent didn't move, didn't interrupt. But nothing else changes. Eli's gaze was steady. "We're not together." Vincent swallowed the words he wanted to say. The promises. The apologies. Instead, he nodded. "I understand." And for the first time, he meant it. Because this wasn't about winning anymore. It was about staying. The months that followed were nothing like Vincent's old life. There were no shortcuts, no control, no guarantees, just patience. He learned how to exist without expecting anything in return. Learned how to show up without demanding to be acknowledged. Learned how to care in ways that didn't revolve around himself. Meanwhile, everything else in his life began to shift. The people who once surrounded him, the ones who laughed, who mocked, who treated everything like a game, slowly disappeared. Vincent didn't call them anymore. Didn't answer when they reached out. Didn't attend the gatherings he once frequented. And Adrian tried. Of course he did. Messages. Calls. Subtle attempts to pull Vincent back into something familiar. "You're overthinking everything," Adrian said once, his voice soft, concerned. "Come see me. We can talk." Vincent didn't respond. Because for the first time, he saw it clearly. The difference between what he thought he wanted and what he had lost. Nights became quieter, simpler. Vincent found himself sitting outside Eli's apartment more often than not because he had to, but because he wanted to be close. Not as someone who owned that space, but as someone who was allowed, just a little closer than before. For months passed like that. Slowly, painfully, but steadily. Vincent didn't rush, didn't push. He just stayed. And every now and then, Eli would look at him a little longer than before. Not with love, not yet, but with something that hadn't been there before. Recognition. And Vincent held on to that. Because this time, he wasn't waiting for Eli to come to him. He was learning how to walk toward Eli one step at a time. Hope is the most dangerous thing, because even when it breaks you, a part of you still wants to believe again. For months had passed, and somehow, everything had changed, and yet, nothing had. Vincent was still there, always there, not in the overwhelming, suffocating way Eli once feared, but in a quiet, persistent presence that never left. Morning messages, waiting outside, walking beside him, sitting nearby without speaking. Small things, consistent things, the kind of things Eli used to do without ever expecting anything in return. And that was what unsettled Eli the most. Because this time, Vincent wasn't asking for anything. Not attention, not forgiveness, not even acknowledgement. He just stayed. Eli noticed it. Of course he did. He noticed everything. The way Vincent adjusted his pace to match his. The way Vincent would subtly position himself closer when crowds got too thick. The way his scent, once sharp and overwhelming, had softened, controlled, careful not to disturb him. Sometimes, Eli would catch himself watching Vincent, just for a second too long, trying to understand when this change had happened, trying to figure out if it was real. And sometimes, just sometimes, a quiet thought would slip in. Maybe this is real. Maybe he's changed. Maybe this time. But Eli would stop himself immediately. The thought never lasted more than a moment before it was shut down, buried under something far stronger. For years of waiting, for years of believing in something that was never there. Eli lowered his gaze slightly, his hand resting protectively over his stomach as he exhaled slowly. That's enough, he murmured softly, more to himself than anything else. Because hope was what had hurt him the most. And he refused to let it do that again. Cashin noticed it too. The change, not just in Vincent, but in Eli. The way Eli had become quieter at times, more thoughtful. The way his eyes would occasionally drift toward Vincent without realizing it. And one evening, as they stood together outside the office building, Cashin finally spoke. You still care about him. It wasn't a question. Eli didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained forward, calm, composed. I cared about him for 4 years, Eli said quietly. That doesn't just disappear. Cashin nodded once, understanding. Then let me stay. Eli turned slightly, his expression soft but firm. Cashin, I know. Cashin interrupted gently, a faint smile on his lips. You don't feel the same. His voice didn't carry disappointment, just honesty. But I can take care of you. And the child. Eli's hand rested over his stomach again, instinctive. For a moment, he hesitated. Because Cashin was everything Vincent wasn't. Steady, kind, present. The kind of person Eli once thought he needed. But Eli shook his head softly. That's not fair to you. Cashin held his gaze. I'm willing. I'm not, Eli said gently. Final. Clear. Cashin studied him for a moment longer, then exhaled softly. Then I'll stay as I am. A small pause. Your friend. Eli nodded. Thank you. The conversation ended there. Simple. Respectful. But somewhere in the distance, someone else was watching. And that person wasn't as calm. Adrian had never been patient. Not when it came to things he believed were his. And watching Vincent change, watching him pull away, watching his attention shift entirely toward Eli. It wasn't something Adrian could tolerate. Not quietly. Not anymore. The smile he wore in public remained soft, gentle, harmless. But behind it, something darker had already taken root. If Eli disappeared, everything would go back to normal. That was what Adrian told himself. That was what he convinced himself was necessary. It happened on a quiet night. Too quiet. Eli had stayed late at work, finishing things before heading home. The streets were nearly empty, the soft glow of streetlights stretching across the pavement as he walked, his pace slower now, more careful in these final weeks. His hand rested over his stomach, a familiar gesture, grounding, protective. The air was cool, still. And then, footsteps. Fast. Sudden. Eli barely had time to react before a figure rushed toward him, face hidden, something glinting sharply under the streetlight. Instinct took over. Eli turned, his body shifting just enough. The blade missed. Too close. Too fast. His breath caught, heart racing as the realization hit all at once. Someone shouted in the distance. Hey, what are you doing? The figure hesitated, just for a second, before turning and running, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as they had appeared. Eli stood frozen for half a second longer, and then his foot slipped. The ground came up too fast. Pain shot through his body as he hit the pavement, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. His hand instinctively moved to his stomach, panic flooding in instantly. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Warmth. Sudden. Unfamiliar. Eli's breathing turned uneven, his body tensing as the realization hit him all at once. No, no. His voice trembled, barely audible. The pain came next. Sharp. Overwhelming. His grip tightened, his body curling slightly as the sensation intensified. Help. The word barely left his lips before another wave hit, stronger this time. Footsteps approached, voices, someone kneeling beside him. Call an ambulance. He's pregnant, hurry. Eli's vision blurred slightly, the world around him becoming distant, fragmented. His only focus was the pressure, the pain, the overwhelming instinct to protect something he couldn't hold on to. It's too early, he whispered weakly, his fingers trembling against his stomach. But his body wasn't waiting. The sound of sirens cut through the night, and everything after that moved too fast. Sometimes, the moment you fear losing everything is the moment you finally understand what truly matters. The hospital lights were too bright, too cold, too unforgiving as Vincent rushed through the corridor, his steps unsteady in a way no one had ever seen before. Control, something he had built his entire life around, was gone. Completely gone. Where is he? His voice came out sharper than intended, his breath uneven as he scanned every face, every door, searching. Eli Vale, where is he? A nurse quickly stepped forward, recognizing the urgency, guiding him toward the delivery room. He's in labor. It started early. The words barely registered before another voice cut in from behind. Vincent. He turned. Cashin stood there, just as tense, just as pale, but composed in a way Vincent no longer was. For a brief moment, the two alphas stood facing each other. No hostility, no rivalry. Just the same fear reflected back. Then the doctor stepped out. We need the father, the doctor said firmly, eyes scanning between them. The omega is unstable, and the baby needs alpha pheromones to regulate. Who is the father? Silence. A second, maybe less. Vincent stepped forward without hesitation. I am. Cashin didn't move, but his gaze shifted slightly, thoughtful, then calm, because in that moment, he remembered something. Something he had overheard when Eli was half-conscious, his voice weak, barely holding on. A name. Not his. Vincent, that was all Eli had said. Over and over again. Cashin exhaled quietly, stepping back. Go, he said simply. And just like that, he let go. Vincent didn't hesitate. He stepped inside. The room was filled with tension, urgency, quiet commands being exchanged as machines monitored every fragile shift. And in the center of it, Eli. Pale. Weak. Fighting. Vincent's breath caught for a second as he moved closer, his hand instinctively reaching for Eli's, holding it firmly. I'm here, he said, his voice lower now, steady despite everything breaking inside him. Eli, I'm here. The process was long. Longer than Vincent expected. Every second stretched, every moment filled with uncertainty as Eli struggled through the pain, his body pushed beyond its limits far too soon. Vincent stayed beside him the entire time, supporting, grounding, letting his pheromones fill the space carefully, controlled, wrapping around Eli in a way that was instinctive now, not possessive, not overwhelming, just protective. You're okay, Vincent murmured quietly, his thumb brushing gently against Eli's hand as Eli's grip tightened painfully around his. You're doing fine. I've got you. Eli didn't respond clearly. His consciousness faded in and out, his breaths uneven, his strength slipping further with each passing moment. But he didn't pull away. Not from Vincent. And that meant everything. Hours passed. And then, a sound. Small, fragile, but unmistakable. A cry. The room shifted instantly. The tension broke just enough for relief to slip in as the doctor carefully lifted the newborn, checking quickly, efficiently. The baby is stable. Vincent's breath stopped for a second. Stable. Alive. Safe. But his gaze didn't move to the child immediately. It stayed on Eli. Because Eli wasn't waking up. He's exhausted, the doctor said, calm but firm. His body went through too much. We'll monitor him closely. Vincent nodded. though his expression remained tight, his hand never leaving Eli's. The baby was cleaned, wrapped, placed gently nearby, but Vincent didn't move. Not yet, because nothing mattered more than Eli opening his eyes again. The first night passed. Then the second. Vincent didn't leave. Not once. He didn't sleep. Didn't rest. Didn't even step away unless absolutely necessary. His appearance changed quickly, dark circles forming beneath his eyes, his posture losing its usual sharp precision, his presence quieter, heavier. But he didn't care. None of it mattered. Not when Eli still hadn't woken up. His hand remained around Eli's almost constantly, his thumb brushing lightly against his skin as if grounding himself more than anything else. "You need to wake up," Vincent murmured at some point, his voice softer than it had ever been. "You promised you'd be okay." The room remained silent. But Vincent stayed. Because this time, he wasn't leaving first. On the second day, sometime in the quiet hours when the world outside had slowed, Eli finally stirred. It was subtle, a small shift, a breath that changed just enough. Vincent noticed immediately. "Eli." His voice was rough, unsteady, the first crack in his control since. All of this began. Eli's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, adjusting to the light, the unfamiliar surroundings. Confusion flickered briefly before something else replaced it. Awareness. His voice was weak, barely there. But Vincent heard it like it was the only sound in the world. Something in his chest broke open instantly. "I'm here," he said quickly, moving closer, his grip tightening slightly around Eli's hand. "I'm right here." Eli blinked slowly, his gaze shifting as something else came to mind. Immediate. Instinctive. The baby. His voice trembled slightly. Vincent didn't hesitate. He stood, moving carefully to the nearby crib, lifting the small, fragile bundle with surprising gentleness before bringing him back. "He's safe," Vincent said quietly. "He's right here." He lowered the baby carefully into Eli's arms, supporting both of them instinctively as Eli looked down. For a moment, everything else faded. Eli's expression softened in a way Vincent had never seen before. Not fragile, not broken, just full, complete. His fingers trembled slightly as they brushed gently against the baby's cheek, his breath catching softly. "Hi," Eli whispered, his voice filled with something deeper than words. Vincent watched silently, something tight settling in his chest again, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was something else. Something warmer. Something steady. He adjusted the blanket slightly, his movements careful, natural, as if he had been doing this for years. "He looks like you," Vincent said quietly. Eli didn't respond immediately, but the faintest hint of a smile appeared. Small, real, and Vincent held on to that like it was everything. Silence settled between them again, but it wasn't heavy this time. Vincent exhaled slowly, his gaze lowering slightly. "I'm sorry." The words came out quiet. Honest. "This happened because of me." Eli's hand paused slightly. Vincent's jaw tightened. The person behind it has already been dealt with. His voice dropped, colder for a brief moment before softening again. "They won't get near you again." Eli listened quietly, but his focus remained on the baby, his hand gently brushing over the small form in his arms. "As long as he's okay," Eli said softly. "That's enough." Vincent's chest tightened again. Eli glanced up then, his gaze lingering on Vincent for a moment longer than before, taking in the exhaustion, the tension, the quiet signs of someone who hadn't rested at all. "You should sleep," Eli said gently. Vincent shook his head. Immediately. "I'm fine." Eli didn't argue. He just looked at him, a little softer this time. "I'm okay," Eli said quietly. "Really?" A pause. "And I know it wasn't you." Vincent stilled slightly. Eli lowered his gaze again, his hand resting protectively over the baby. "You wouldn't do that." The words were simple, but they carried something Vincent hadn't expected. Trust. Small, fragile, but real. And for the first time in a long time, Vincent didn't know what to say, so he didn't. He just stayed there, close, careful, watching over both of them, because this time, he finally understood what it meant to protect something that mattered. Sometimes, happiness returns in the quietest ways, and that's what makes it the hardest to let go. Vincent didn't ask immediately. Not when Eli was still recovering. Not when the baby was barely days old. Not when everything between them was still fragile, uncertain. But the thought had already settled in his mind, and once it did, it refused to leave. It came one quiet afternoon, when Eli sat by the window in the hospital room, the baby resting peacefully in his arms, sunlight soft against his pale features. Vincent stood nearby, watching them in silence for a long moment before finally speaking. "Come back with me." Eli didn't look up right away. His fingers moved gently against the baby's back, instinctive, careful. "Just for now," Vincent added quickly, his voice lower, more measured. "You don't have to stay." That made Eli pause. Slowly, he lifted his gaze. Vincent met his eyes, steady, but there was something different there now. Not command, not control. Restraint. Care. "The baby," Vincent continued quietly. "He needs both alpha and omega pheromones. It'll help him stabilize. Grow better." Eli's expression didn't change, but he didn't interrupt. "And you?" Vincent hesitated, then continued more softly. "You need proper care too." A pause. "I won't do anything you don't want." His voice was firm now. "Certain. You can leave any time." Silence stretched between them, heavier than before, but not suffocating. Eli looked down at the baby again, his fingers brushing gently across the soft fabric wrapped around him. He knew Vincent was right. Not about everything, but about this. The baby needed stability. Needed both of them. And right now, Eli wasn't in a position to refuse that. "Just for the baby," Eli said finally, his voice quiet. Vincent didn't smile. Didn't show relief. But something in his posture shifted, just slightly. Of course, when Eli returned to the villa, nothing had changed. And somehow, that was what affected him the most. The gates opened slowly, the familiar path stretching ahead, leading toward a place that once held everything he thought he had. Eli stepped out of the car carefully, his movements still slower than before, his arms holding the baby close. And then he noticed it. The garden. The flowers. They were still there. Not just there, but cared for. Every detail maintained. Every color still vibrant. Every corner arranged exactly the way Eli used to keep it. Vincent had always disliked it. Thought it unnecessary. Too soft. Too much. And yet, it remained untouched. Preserved. Eli's steps slowed slightly as he looked at it. Something quiet settling in his chest. "You kept them." Vincent's voice came from just behind him. "You like them." That was all he said. Simple, but enough. Inside, the villa felt just as familiar, and just as unchanged. Nothing had been moved. Nothing had been replaced. As if time had paused the moment Eli left. Eli walked through the space slowly, his gaze drifting across the rooms, the details, the memories that hadn't faded the way he thought they would. And then his door. Eli hesitated for just a second before pushing it open. The room was exactly the same. Clean. Neat. Everything in its place. Even the smallest details remained untouched, as if someone had been preserving it carefully, waiting. Eli stepped inside, the feeling unfamiliar, almost surreal. Like he had never left. "I had it cleaned regularly," Vincent said quietly from the doorway. "In case you came back." Eli didn't respond, because he didn't know how to. But then Vincent spoke again. "There's something else." He stepped aside slightly. "Come see." Eli followed, curiosity faint but present. And when the door opened, he stopped. A new room. Soft colors. Gentle light. Carefully arranged furniture. Every detail designed with intention, with care. A crib. Small clothes. Everything prepared, as if someone had been waiting for a child who hadn't even been born yet. Eli's breath caught slightly. "When?" Vincent's voice was quieter now. "After I found out." A pause. "I didn't know if you'd come back." Another pause. "But I wanted it to be ready." Eli stood there for a long moment, his fingers tightening slightly around the baby. In his arms. Something in his chest shifted again. Not the same pain. Not the same distance. Something softer. Warmer. "Thank you," Eli said quietly. Vincent didn't respond immediately, because to him, it wasn't something to be thanked for. It was something he should have done long ago. But Eli turned slightly, his gaze steady again. "I'll stay until he's won." The words came out calm. Clear. Vincent's chest tightened slightly. But he didn't argue. Didn't push. He just nodded once. All right. Because this time, he wouldn't force anything. Life settled into something new after that. Something unfamiliar, but warm. Mornings were quieter now. Softer. Eli would wake early, the baby in his arms, the light just beginning to fill the room. And Vincent would already be there. Not hovering. Not controlling. Just present. Sometimes preparing things quietly. Sometimes just watching. Learning. The house changed. Not in structure, but in feeling. There was laughter now. Soft, small, but real. There were moments of quiet peace. Eli sitting by the window, the baby resting against him, Vincent nearby, the the silence no longer empty. Sometimes, Vincent would reach out, carefully, slowly, adjusting a blanket, supporting Eli when he looked too tired, learning how to hold the baby with surprising gentleness. No one spoke about it, but everything had changed. And sometimes, Eli would forget, just for a moment, forget the past, forget the pain, forget the years of waiting and silence. And in those moments, it felt like a real family, like something he had always wanted, something he had once believed in. But those moments never lasted, because reality always returned. Eli would catch himself, the way his heart softened too easily, the way his thoughts drifted too far, and he would stop, every time, because he knew better now, knew what it felt like to believe in something that wasn't real, knew how much it hurt when it disappeared. So he reminded himself, again and again, this is temporary, just like before. But this time, he wouldn't be the one left behind. Eli looked down at the baby resting peacefully in his arms, his fingers brushing gently against soft skin. Just until you're strong enough, he whispered quietly. His gaze lifted slightly, falling toward the figure standing nearby. Watching, waiting, still there. Eli exhaled slowly, because the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was staying long enough to want to stay forever. Sometimes, the heart doesn't need more promises, it just needs a reason to believe again. The night of Eli's birthday arrived quietly, almost unnoticed at first. Eli himself had nearly forgotten. Days had blended together, feeding, resting, working when he could, living in that fragile balance between peace and restraint. But Vincent hadn't forgotten. Not this time. When Eli stepped into the garden that evening, he stopped. Completely. The space in front of him had transformed. Soft candlelight flickered across the pathways, carefully arranged in a way that felt both intimate and warm. The flowers, his flowers, were in full bloom, more vibrant than he had ever seen them, their colors glowing gently under the dim lights. A small table was set in the center, simple but elegant, everything prepared with quiet precision. It wasn't extravagant in the way Vincent used to do things. It was thoughtful, personal. Eli's breath caught slightly, his fingers tightening unconsciously around the edge of his sleeve. Vincent. His voice was soft, uncertain. Vincent stepped forward from the shadows, dressed simply, without the usual sharp formality that defined him. For once, he looked less like the man everyone feared, and more like someone who was trying. Happy birthday, Eli. The words were quiet, sincere. Eli didn't move at first, because something in his chest had already begun to tighten. Slowly, he walked forward, his gaze drifting across every detail, every small effort Vincent had put into this. You did all this? Vincent nodded once. Myself. A pause. I wanted to. Eli swallowed slightly, something fragile already forming in his eyes. They sat together in silence at first, the soft sounds of the night filling the space between them. No pressure, no expectations, just presence. And then, the sky above them lit up. Eli's gaze lifted instinctively as lights began to form shapes in the dark, drones moving in perfect synchronization, painting the night with shifting patterns. Soft colors, gentle movements, and then words. Simple, clear, stay. Eli's breath hitched. The lights shifted again, forming something else. A small figure, then two, then three. A family. Eli's vision blurred slightly, and before he could steady himself, Vincent stood. Eli looked up and froze, because Vincent was kneeling, a small box in his hand. Open. A ring. Simple. Elegant. But more than that, real. Eli. Vincent's voice wasn't steady this time. It carried something deeper. Something raw. I know I don't deserve this. A pause. I know I've hurt you more than anyone ever should. Eli's hands trembled slightly, his chest tightening as everything he had buried, everything he had forced down for so long, began to rise. But I also know, Vincent continued, his gaze unwavering, that you still love me. Eli's breath broke. Just slightly. Enough. And Vincent exhaled slowly. I love you. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Not the way I thought I did before. His grip on the ring tightened slightly. This time, I know what it means. Eli's tears fell before he could stop them. Quiet at first, then more. Everything he had held back for so long, breaking free all at once. Give me another chance, Vincent said, his voice lower now. Not because I deserve it. A pause. But because I want to spend the rest of my life making up for everything I did wrong. Eli shook his head slightly, tears continuing to fall, his emotions overwhelming, tangled, impossible to sort. Vincent's voice softened further. If you still don't believe me, he took a breath. Then mark me. Eli froze. Vincent held his gaze, completely serious. A full mark. His voice didn't waver. I won't be able to bond with anyone else. Ever. A pause. And if I lose you, his expression tightened slightly. I'll live with that. Silence filled the space between them. Heavy. Real. Eli's chest rose and fell unevenly as he struggled to steady himself. His voice broke slightly. I do still love you. The confession came out quiet. Barely there. But it was enough. Vincent's grip tightened instinctively. But Eli shook his head again, tears falling faster now. That never changed. His voice trembled. Even when I left, even when I tried to stop, he closed his eyes briefly. It never went away. Vincent's chest tightened painfully. Then, but what about the future? Eli's voice rose slightly, fragile but firm. What happens when things change again? His gaze met Vincent's, filled with fear that hadn't faded. I've been left before. His voice softened. My family, a pause. And you. The words landed heavier than anything else. I can't. Eli shook his head, his hands trembling. I can't go through that again. Vincent stood slowly, closing the distance between them without hesitation, pulling Eli into his arms. Tight. Secure. Careful. One hand gently cradling the back of Eli's head as the other held him close. I know. Vincent's voice was low, close, steady. I know I was the worst thing that ever happened to you. His hand moved softly, wiping away Eli's tears, his touch gentle in a way Eli had never known before. And I don't expect you to forgive me. He leaned down slightly, pressing a soft kiss to Eli's forehead. Then to his hair. I don't even expect you to trust me. Eli's breath shook, but he didn't pull away. But trust yourself. Vincent murmured quietly. You deserve to be happy. His hand rested lightly against Eli's cheek. Not because someone gives it to you. A pause. But because you choose it. Eli's tears slowed slightly, his breathing uneven but calmer. Vincent exhaled softly. Are you happy right now? Eli hesitated, then nodded. Just slightly. But enough. Vincent's gaze softened. Then don't run from that. His voice lowered. If you leave, I know you'll be okay. A faint, sad smile. You're strong enough. A pause. But will you be happy? Eli didn't answer. Because he didn't know. Vincent's arms tightened slightly around him. I was a terrible man. His voice dropped. But I keep my promises. A pause. Stay. The word was soft. And if you ever leave again. He pulled back just enough to meet Eli's eyes. Leave because you're no longer happy with me. His gaze didn't waver. Not because you're afraid of something that hasn't even happened yet. Silence settled between them again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. Eli's body relaxed slightly in Vincent's arms, the warmth surrounding him, grounding him, holding him together as everything inside him slowly untangled. He cried quietly, finally allowing himself to release everything he had held back for so long. Vincent didn't speak, didn't move. He just stayed there, holding him. When Eli finally calmed, his voice was soft, exhausted, but steady. I need time. Vincent nodded immediately. Take all the time you need. Eli hesitated, then added quietly, I'll think about it. And for Vincent, that was enough. Happiness always feels the most fragile, right before it's taken away. Morning light spilled gently through the curtains, soft and warm, painting the room in a quiet golden glow. The villa, once cold and distant, now carried a different kind of warmth, one that lingered in the air, in the quiet sounds of life that filled the space. In the center of it all was laughter. Small, bright, unrestrained. Hey. No. Theo, not that. Eli's voice was soft but laced with a quiet laugh as he reached forward, trying to gently take back the small wooden spoon that had somehow become the most fascinating object in the world. Theo, 10 months old, soft curls falling messily over his forehead, big round eyes filled with curiosity, only giggled louder, clutching the spoon like a prize as he wobbled slightly in Vincent's arms. He's winning, Vincent said calmly, though there was the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. His usual cold demeanor completely softened as he adjusted his hold, steadying the small body leaning forward with determination. Theo squealed happily, reaching out again, this time toward Eli, his tiny fingers opening and closing as if demanding attention. All right. Eli smiled, leaning closer, his hand brushing gently against Theo's cheek before taking him into his arms. Theo immediately nestled in, small hands grabbing at Eli's shirt, his laughter softening into quiet, content sounds. Vincent watched the interaction silently for a moment, something warm settling in his chest. A feeling he had once never understood, never valued, and now couldn't live without. Breakfast was simple, quiet, but filled with small, effortless moments. Theo babbling softly as he sat between them, occasionally reaching out to grab Vincent's finger or leaning toward Eli when he wanted attention. And every time, they responded. Naturally. Together. For a brief moment, it felt complete. But reality didn't stay quiet for long. "I have a checkup today," Eli said softly, adjusting Theo's blanket as he stood. Vincent nodded. "I'll come with you." Eli shook his head lightly. "It's just routine." A pause. "Stay with him." Vincent didn't argue, because now he understood when to step back. Hours later, the house felt different again. Quieter. Still. Eli stepped inside, closing the door behind him, his expression calm. But that calm lasted only a second. "Theo." No answer. His steps quickened. "Theo." The silence stretched. Wrong. Something was wrong. Eli's heart began to race, his breath catching as he moved faster, searching each room, each space, empty. "No." His voice trembled slightly as he reached for his phone, dialing quickly. No answer. Again. Still nothing. Panic hit instantly. Sharp. Overwhelming. Eli's hands shook as he turned toward the security panel, pulling up the camera footage. His breath stopped. The screen showed it clearly. A woman, face partially hidden, carrying Theo, moving quickly. A car. Gone. No, no, no. Eli stumbled back slightly, his mind racing, his chest tightening painfully. His hands trembled as he dialed again. "Vincent, Eli." Vincent's voice came immediately. "Theo, he's gone. Someone took him." The words broke apart, panic flooding through every syllable. Silence. Then Vincent's voice, lower. "Controlled. Too controlled. Stay where you are." A pause. "I'm coming." Before Eli could respond, the phone rang again. Unknown number. Eli answered instantly. "Hello." A soft laugh came through. Familiar. Too familiar. "Miss me?" Eli's blood ran cold. "Adrian." "Bring yourself." Adrian's voice was light, almost playful. "Alone." A pause. "Or you'll never see him again." The line went dead. The location came moments later. A yacht. Isolated. Waiting. Eli didn't hesitate. He left immediately. By the time he arrived, the sky had already begun to darken, the water reflecting faint, shifting lights as the yacht loomed ahead, quiet and dangerous. Eli stepped aboard slowly, his heart pounding violently in his chest. "Theo, relax." Adrian stepped forward, his expression no longer soft, no longer controlled. Something unhinged flickered in his eyes. "He's fine." Eli's gaze snapped toward the side. Theo was there. Safe. Crying softly. Eli's breath broke in relief, but it didn't last. "You'll take him," Adrian said calmly. "Leave this country." A pause. "And never come back." Eli's expression hardened slightly. "You've lost your mind." Adrian's smile twisted. No, his voice dropped. "I lost everything." The sound of movement, sirens. Adrian's expression shifted instantly. "Panic." "You called them." "No, but it was too late." Chaos broke out. And then, Vincent. He moved faster than Eli had ever seen, his presence cutting through everything as his gaze locked instantly onto Eli. "Let him go." Adrian's grip tightened suddenly, his hand grabbing Eli, pulling him back, a blade flashing into view. "Don't move." Vincent stopped immediately. His voice dropped. "Take me instead." Eli's breath hitched. "No, I said take me." Vincent stepped forward slowly, his eyes never leaving Adrian's. "You want someone to blame?" A pause. "It's me." For a moment, Adrian hesitated. And that was all it took. Vincent moved. Fast. Precise. Eli was pulled free, and then pain. Sharp. Sudden. Vincent's body jerked slightly as the blade struck. Not Eli. Him. Blood. Too much. Eli's world shattered instantly. "Vincent." The sound of sirens grew louder. Officers rushed in. Adrian was restrained, his voice fading into distant noise. But Eli didn't see any of it. Because Vincent was falling. And Eli caught him. "No. No. Stay with me." His hands trembled, pressing against the wound, panic flooding through him in waves that wouldn't stop. "You're okay. You're okay." But Vincent didn't respond immediately. His breathing was shallow, weak. Ambulance now? Everything blurred after that. The ride, the chaos, the noise. None of it mattered. Eli's hands never left Vincent's. Don't close your eyes. His voice broke, tears falling freely now. You said you loved me. His grip tightened desperately. You don't get to leave, do you hear me? Vincent's fingers twitched slightly in his grasp. Barely, but enough. Eli, his voice was weak, almost gone. Eli shook his head violently, tears falling faster. No, no, don't talk. Just stay. His voice cracked completely. Me and Theo. We need you. His breath hitched painfully. You said you were waiting for my answer, right? Eli's grip tightened, desperation filling every word. Then you don't get to go anywhere. Tears blurred everything. I love you. The words broke free, raw and unfiltered. I want to stay. I want to be with you, so don't leave me. His voice collapsed into sobs. Please, don't leave us behind. And for the first time, Eli wasn't holding back anything anymore. Sometimes, the ending you feared becomes the beginning you were waiting for all along. The sterile scent of the hospital still lingered in the air when the doctor finally stepped out, his expression calm, steady, reassuring in a way Eli had been desperately searching for. He's stable, the doctor said clearly. There was significant blood loss, but no major organ damage. He's out of danger now. Eli didn't realize he had been holding his breath until that moment. His body seemed to lose all strength at once, his hand gripping the edge of the wall for support as relief flooded through him so suddenly it almost hurt. Thank you, he whispered, his voice trembling despite his effort to steady it. When Eli finally stepped into the room, everything felt quieter, softer. Vincent lay there, pale but alive, his breathing steady, though faint lines of discomfort still marked his expression even in sleep. Eli moved closer slowly, as if afraid that even the smallest sound might disturb the fragile peace that had returned. His hand lifted instinctively, fingers brushing gently against Vincent's forehead, smoothing out the crease that remained between his brows. Still frowning, Eli murmured softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Even when you're asleep. His gaze lingered there, taking in every detail. The sharp lines of Vincent's face softened by exhaustion, the familiar features that Theo had inherited so clearly. 7, maybe 8 parts alike. Eli's chest tightened slightly, but this time, it wasn't pain. It was gratitude. Thank you for staying, he whispered quietly, as if Vincent could hear him, as if he needed to say it out loud. Vincent stirred not long after. His eyelids fluttered slightly before slowly opening, his gaze unfocused at first until it found Eli. And then he smiled. Not the confident, controlled smile Eli had known for years. Something softer, almost playful, despite the weakness. Guess this is my punishment. Vincent's voice was hoarse, but light. For everything I did to you. Eli's expression shifted instantly. Don't say that. His voice was firm, sharper than Vincent expected. Vincent blinked slightly, caught off guard, but before he could respond, Eli leaned closer, his gaze steady despite the faint redness in his eyes. You don't get to talk like that, Eli said quietly. Not about yourself. Vincent was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, his hand lifted, reaching for Eli's. When their fingers touched, he held on, gently, but firmly, as if grounding himself. I heard you, Vincent said softly. Eli froze slightly. Vincent's gaze didn't waver. On the ambulance. A pause. I just couldn't answer. Eli's breath caught slightly, warmth rushing to his face almost immediately. You weren't supposed to hear that. Vincent's lips curved slightly, his grip on Eli's hand tightening just a little. So, his voice lowered, softer now. You made your choice. Eli hesitated, just for a second. Then he nodded. Small, shy, but certain. Vincent's expression softened in a way Eli had never seen before. No hesitation, no doubt, just quiet certainty. I won't let you regret it. His thumb brushed lightly against Eli's hand. Not this time. Silence followed. But it wasn't empty. It wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. They stayed like that for a long time. No need for more words. No need to explain anything further. Because somehow, they both understood. And for the first time, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt possible. 5 days later, the air outside felt different. Fresher, warmer. Vincent stepped out of the hospital slowly, still recovering but steady enough, his movements careful but determined. Eli stood beside him, Theo in his arms, the small boy. babbling softly, unaware of everything that had happened. The moment Vincent saw him, really saw him again, something in his chest tightened instantly. "Hey," Vincent murmured softly, stepping closer. Theo blinked up at him for a second before breaking into a wide, delighted smile, his tiny hands reaching out immediately. "Duh." Vincent's breath caught slightly as he carefully took Theo into his arms, holding him closer than before, more carefully than ever. "I'm sorry," Vincent said quietly, his voice softer than Eli had ever heard. "Because of me. You had to go through something you never should have." Theo only giggled, completely unconcerned, his small fingers grabbing onto Vincent's shirt as if nothing else mattered. Vincent let out a quiet breath, his forehead resting lightly against Theo's for a moment. From now on, his voice lowered, steadier. "I'll be there." A pause. "For both of you." Eli watched silently, something warm settling deep in his chest as he stepped closer, his hand resting lightly against Vincent's arm. The three of them stood there for a moment, close, quiet, together. And for once, nothing felt incomplete. Vincent shifted slightly, his gaze lifting toward Eli again, something familiar returning, but softer now. "I'm better now," he said lightly. A faint smile. "So," his tone shifted just slightly, something teasing beneath it, but still sincere. "You can mark me." Eli blinked, caught off guard for a second, before a small, helpless smile appeared. "No," Vincent paused. Eli's gaze remained steady. "I don't want to use something like that to keep you." His voice was calm. "Certain. That's not love." Vincent didn't interrupt. Eli continued quietly. "If one day, one of us doesn't feel the same anymore," a pause, "then we should be honest enough to let each other go." His fingers tightened slightly around Theo's blanket. Peacefully, Vincent looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not disappointed. Not conflicted. Just certain. That day won't come. Eli didn't respond immediately. But this time, he didn't argue either. Because for the first time, he wanted to believe that too. Vincent adjusted his hold on Theo, his free hand reaching for Eli's naturally, their fingers intertwining without hesitation. "Let's go home," he said quietly. And this time, it truly felt like one.